Does your content work? This question sounds simple, but many companies struggle to answer it, and they miss out on making their content really effective for their customers. The good news is it doesn't have to be that way. Today, I'm going to share tips for understanding whether your content works so you can optimize it and much more. But first, I'd like to share a little bit more about me and content science so you have a sense of where I'm coming from. I am the founder of Content Science, and I'm really excited about the way the content industry has evolved over the past 10 years. It's really super exciting to have the innovation, to have lots of smart people involved, and I can't wait to see where we go next. I have a lot of experience with content science. I'm also the former head of content at MailChimp. I've worked in a lot of different scenarios with every type of content that supports every aspect of the customer experience. And I'm really excited about sharing lessons learned in top rated courses on LinkedIn, top rated books like the Content Science Academy. But probably the most important thing to know about me is that I am a Star Wars fan and a proud dog parent. This is my dog, Dottie, who is a really good sport here. And if Yoda, who Dottie is dressed up as here, in case that wasn't obvious, if Yoda was here with us today, I think Yoda would say something like, matters more than ever, content effectiveness does. And that's because we're living in a different business era. So business today depends very, very heavily on content because business today is very relationship centric. The subscription business model in various forms really is sweeping, every type of industry. It used to be mainly in the technology, maybe financial services space, but now it's every industry is looking at ways to do some kind of variation of the subscription model. And relationships today are largely digital. So long-term, repeat relationships with customers, often the relationship being conducted in some kind of digital way, means that customers today really expect the right content at the right time, regardless of channel. They expect that, they demand that for the entire customer experience, the entire duration of their relationship with you as a business. And, that really places a lot of demand on content. Now, it's tempting, if you're a business and you're figuring out how are we going to deal with this challenge around content, really providing our customers what they need every step of the way. It's tempting to think that you really need to increase the volume of your content. And what we have found is that actually volume isn't so much of a challenge. It's pretty easy to pump out a lot of content if you're really focused on content volume. And you're seeing here just a few data points supporting that, just some of the evidence. What the real challenge is, if you're really trying to be a great business, offering a great experience, is sustaining effective content. And these are just a few quotes in and around different aspects of effective content from various, thought leaders and smart folks who have made some interesting observations. McKinsey has noted the need for a supply chain of sophisticated and interactive content to feed this customer demand. Forrester has called out in different ways how marketers are struggling to offer compelling content in different scenarios. This fact is about B2B in particular. Gartner has called out some of the technical and structural side of this content challenge, bringing together a great diversity of content at different levels of granularity, or different ways of approaching atomic content. And we have found that even though the most successful companies and organizations are evaluating content effectiveness, they're measuring the impact of their content, only about a third of them are actually doing it. So the real challenge today is sustaining effective content. And today we're going to tackle that challenge by answering these three key questions. What is content effectiveness? How do successful organizations measure it? And how can I get started? So first things first, what is content effectiveness anyway? I define it as the ability of content to enable your customers to achieve goals while also achieving your goals as a business or an organization. In other words, content has to work for your customers as it works for your business. And the content science team and I have spent quite a lot of time studying content effectiveness. We found that content effectiveness is comprised of key dimensions. We boiled it down to 6 in particular. One is content discovery. How do your users discover content? Can your customers, your users, easily find what it is they really need and want? The second dimension is accuracy. Is the content correct, and do your customers in fact see it that way? The third element or dimension is polish. Do your customers perceive the content formatting, the style, the voice, the design to be appropriate in terms of the level of quality? On social media, you might be able to be less formal or have a little bit less quality in some contexts. In other contexts, you really need to have a very highly polished approach to your content. Relevancy and usefulness. Do your customers see the content as relevant to their needs, their situation? Does it anticipate the questions that they have? And usefulness, do your customers really see the content that you're offering as valuable? Is it different? Is it really fulfilling the promise that you have placed around the content? And then finally, influence. Does the content really influence your customers to make a decision or to take an action? Obviously, the ideal situation here is that the action or decision is positive for them and it's positive for you. Now, these dimensions are grounded in a lot of data. We collected extensive data about content effectiveness with our tool called ContentWRX. This is data from more than 160,000 content consumers, or people really trying to use content to achieve a goal, answer a question, and so on. And we conducted really in-depth analysis to understand to what extent each dimension has on overall effectiveness. And we learned a lot, so I'm going to share a few key insights. So let's start with content discovery. I'm sure you realize that if people can't discover or find your content, it might as well not exist. And of course, your customers will be frustrated. But the really fascinating nuance we discovered is what happens when people have difficulty finding the content, but eventually do. They perceive the content overall as much less effective. Another way of looking at this insight is that if your customers had trouble finding your content, but eventually did, they are about half as likely to view that content as accurate. They're nearly 1/3 as likely to view that content as relevant. They're about half as likely to perceive that content as useful. So a bad experience getting to content distorts every other perception about the content. You really have to get this as right as possible. So let's move on to accuracy and polish. We have found that if customers, users perceive content as accurate and at the appropriate level of polish, they're more likely to trust it as relevant and useful to their goal and actually accomplish their goal. So this is really not only about making your content actually accurate, it's also about providing signals, visual cues within the content that give your customers confidence that it is true, that it is credible, that it is factual, that it is up to date. It's about giving your customers confidence in the content. So, you could have accurate content, but if you have some kind of confusing display of dates, for example, within the content, this is something I've seen numerous times, you cause some doubt within customers about whether the content is actually accurate. So, if you are a content marketer or a content professional and you're not working closely with people in customer experience or user experience about the way people are experiencing your content, you're at risk of having some of these unintended seeds of doubt planted within your customer's perspective. This is really about giving your customers confidence that they can trust your content. Now, in 2021, the status of these elements of content effectiveness is even more complicated than it already is. These are really important but challenging areas of content to work on. And the reason these elements or dimensions of content effectiveness are more challenging is because of the tsunami misinformation that has happened, especially over the past year and a half. Consumer reports and the FTC have reported, all kinds of fraud, and of course, fraudulent product information and content plays a role there. Fact-checking sites like Snopes have been overwhelmed in trying to keep up with, rumors and deep fakes and just all of the misinformation and disinformation that has flooded us online. All of this obviously makes accurate and polished content harder to find. But what's even more concerning is misinformation is a sustained way of attacking trust and truth. And you with your content, you're trying to build up trust and really get the truth about your business and about your product and about topics related to those things out there. And having all of this misinformation out there really creates an atmosphere of frustration and confusion and chaos as people try to find information to answer their questions and to offer trustworthy guidance online. And this obviously makes everything from disease to discrimination spread even faster, as we've seen over the past year and a half. And it also means for you, it's more important than ever to track how people are discovering your content and whether they do in fact perceive it as accurate and polished. Now, let's turn to the last three dimensions: relevance, usefulness, and influence. If customers view your content as useful and relevant, that will more likely influence customers to achieve their goals. And we're sharing here, some of the evidence around this. Having your content be useful but not relevant, or relevant but not useful, really isn't going to cut it. And you can see here the overall ContentWRX effectiveness score was highest when people viewed content as both useful and relevant. You really need both of those elements together. You need really great, substantive, useful content that is relevant to the particular customers or audiences that you're trying to connect with and reach. Now, the status of these dimensions of content effectiveness also is complicated here today. We have done some deeper diving into the data around these to understand a little bit more about where the opportunities are to make content more relevant and more useful. So I'm going to share some of the insights that we have learned from this analysis. Content, and in particular content marketing, has been around for a while. I think that's fair to say. A lot of the basic topics are covered on a shallow level. They are covered. You know, basic personal finance tips, basic health tips. A lot of that has been covered. And our research has found customers notice this. When your content lacks detail and sophistication, customers will view your content as less useful and less relevant, and they will be less likely to be influenced by your content. What this means is you can't keep covering the same basics over and over and over and expect to be viewed as a trustworthy source of great content and to be influential. Now, you might not be doing this. I'm not trying to call anyone out personally over this, but it's always tempting, especially in the content marketing space, to cover, in some way what's already been covered and not put the effort into differentiating, going deeper. It takes a lot of work to do that. And so what I'm saying here is, if you're really advocating for being great and for being more sophisticated, you're on the right track. It really is going to pay off. Some other evidence that I'd like to share is we found that if customers view the content as not geared toward their specific needs, they'll be less likely to be influenced by it. What this means is you can't keep trying to reach a broad audience. You can't not segment your audience or your market and expect to be successful with content. Think about what segments or audiences you really need to focus on and prioritize creating content for them. It will really differentiate you. It will really make your content influential on those customers. Great. So now that we've covered what content effectiveness is, let's take a closer look at how successful organizations track it. So the good news here is we've gained a lot of insight at Content Science about what great organizations do to measure content effectiveness. We've conducted a series of studies on content operations, and the most recent one was actually this year. We look at many elements of content operations, including measurement and evaluation. And one of the most exciting findings from this research is that the very act of measuring content effectiveness correlates more with overall success. So you can see in this table that we have a list of statements about efficiency and success with content operations, and we have a column showing the participants in the study who say they do measure content, and a column for those who say they don't. And you can see very clearly across all of these elements, ranging from having clear goals to having the flexibility to respond to change, that organizations that do measure content effectiveness or impact in some way are more successful. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the bad news is only about a third of organizations are falling into this column. So I want to help you make it into this elite third of companies that are doing things right. So I'm going to share with you what we discovered when we took a closer look at what this group is doing in terms of measuring content effectiveness and impact. Specifically, we're going to look at the top 3 things that these organizations are doing. And the first is they define clear goals. These goals come from a clear content vision and strategy. If you think about this, it makes a lot of sense. It's much easier to figure out what to measure if the goals overall are clear. Now, we don't have time today to go over how to define your vision and strategy, but I'll share resources at the end, and there are other great sessions as a part of this CSC Live event that will help as well. A second thing that successful organizations do is they use a variety of data when they are evaluating or measuring content effectiveness or impact. So let me share a little bit of evidence here. Now, if you're like a lot of people, typically when you think about measuring content, you might think about analytics and website analytics in particular. That certainly is key. But our study found that successful organizations use 30% more types of data as they are assessing the impact and effectiveness of their content. And we found that 50%, half of the most mature organizations or companies are using specifically voice of customer data and competitive tracking data in addition to things like website analytics. So diversifying the data that you use to understand what's going on with your content, how effective it is an important step in being successful in understanding truly the impact of your content. Now, a third thing that successful organizations do around measuring content effectiveness is use a stack of tools and technology. And this certainly is related to using diverse sources of data. Very successful organizations are most likely to use web analytics, social analytics, competitive tracking, and voice of customer tools. And we also found that the successful organizations are using 35% more types of data tools in the course of understanding and using understanding and gaining insight about their content effectiveness. So this makes a lot of sense as well. Expecting a content management tool to provide all of this data for you on top of everything else a content management tool does simply is not realistic. It's time to think in terms of a collection of tools, a stack of technology that can help you understand the impact of your content. And this is just a sampling of the types of tools mentioned in our research. There's certainly other tools out there, and there's a lot of great opportunity to take advantage of tools today to help with diversifying that data as well as interpreting what it means for you and your content. It's a very exciting time to really try and measure content effectiveness. So, to sum this up, the most successful organizations are moving from this old world of content measurement where it didn't happen, it didn't exist, or it depended on vanity metrics, to a new world with clear content KPIs informed by a variety of data about content effectiveness. So now you might be wondering, how do I actually get started with doing some of this great work around measuring content effectiveness? And I'd like to share 2 steps in particular that you can take, as well as some resources that will help you with those steps. The first step is to complete a content KPI matrix. And the best way to do this is to ask questions aligned with your goals, then identify data that can help answer those questions. So don't dive into all of the data that is potentially available first. You'll get lost in a sea of data. Start with questions. And this is a very natural, human way to approach this as well, if you're not super comfortable with data and numbers. What are the questions that you would like to see answered that will really help you understand whether your content is achieving its goals? Is your content being effective? So let's say your business is offering new products or services to a new market, and you're charged with developing content to position your company as a trusted advisor to this new market. Your matrix might look something like this. You might not be certain that you can get the data in a particular area or to answer a particular question, but go ahead and write down what you think might be possible in terms of data points that answer your questions. So you can see here, we've got 3 areas to explore. Reach is our website content reaching the priority audiences in the new market. Engagement is our website content engaging those audiences in the way that we would like. And then influence are the priority audiences within this new market. Are they returning on an ongoing basis to the content? And are they taking some kind of next step? Are they making some kind of decision? And are they perceiving us differently? Are they perceiving us as the trusted advisor that we're aspiring to be for them? So this is just an example. What your exact matrix becomes might be different, but I'm sharing with you as a resource a worksheet for creating a content KPI matrix so you can play around with this and explore it and really make it your own. Now, when you do this, you're then ready for the second step, which is to conduct a gap analysis. Look at what data tools you have, where you might need to add a data source, where you might need to add a tool to help you get data that maybe isn't available to you currently. You might also see opportunity to eliminate a tool because you have some redundancy. Taking time to do this will save you a lot of hassle and effort as you take a look at the thousands of tools available today. And again, to make this easier for you, I'm sharing a worksheet as a download. In addition to those resources, you'll get, of course, these slides and a copy of the new content science report on operations called What Makes Content Operations Successful. And I'm also excited to share with you 2 discounts on education and a tool that we developed, ContentWRX, that can continue to support your journey to becoming a Jedi of content effectiveness. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and if you take nothing else away, I hope you take away this. You are living in the content era of business. To be a great company, you must offer great content. The only way to offer great content at scale is to understand and measure your content's effectiveness. This isn't my opinion. This is fact based on years of research. I'm excited about the opportunity that lies before you. and I can't wait to hear about your success.